How do you decide your sound palettes?
Sometimes I might have more of like chords and melody idea, and I'll write that down really fast with like a regular synth or a piano sound. It's much more important to get the right emotion and atmosphere, so
What are the different stages of developing a game like that?
if you don't try things that you've never tried, then you're gonna kind of just be circulating around the same ideas your whole life, which is not in your best interest if you're kind of trying to create stuff your whole life, I think.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to episode 8 of Artist Corner. Today, I am interviewing an incredibly talented musician, game developer, and programmer who is part of the two-team studio and Analgesic Productions.
Yes.
Would
Yeah.
you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah. Hi, everyone watching. I'm Melos Han-Tani, and I'm Tokyo-based and one half of the studio Analgesic Productions, which we've done the Anodyne series, even the Ocean Symphony, and are working on Angeline Era right now.
Yeah, I've been seeing quite a bit of Angeline Era, and it looks really good.
Thank
I
you.
think it looks pretty different to your other works, actually. And is this your first time doing a 3D platformer that's in that style?
Yeah, it's the first time doing a 3D, uh, like a top-down 3D game, and it's our first time doing an action game. I mean, Anodyne, all of our games kind of have like action-esque elements, but it's the first time we're really focusing on, combat as a very large part of it, rather than just kind of like, something you do as you go from area to area in like Anodyne or something.
How does the music differ from previous games?
Yes, and Angelina Era has been a pretty, I don't know, not challenging, but like I guess fun soundtrack to work on. Like, because in the game there's like kind of like three races, sort of. There's like humans, angels, and like the Fae, and they all kind of represent different things. So I've been thinking about. I'm not really sticking like so closely to this for everything, but different ways of like getting at those characters through different kind of sound palettes and instrument choices. Like, the stuff relating to the Fae is maybe a bit more focused on kind of like more like dance and club music influences, like darker textures, and then humans is a lot more kind of like my normal style, but mixed in a lot with like a lot of guitars and like kind of distortion stuff. And then the angels also kind of takes kind of like a club music influence, but focused on more of those like cleaner, kind of like shiny textures.
That,
But yeah, it's been the first time I've been able to kind of like do a lot of like dance influence stuff, which has been a lot of fun because usually, that doesn't fit the vibe too well of our games. So, yeah.
that's really interesting you say that. I kind of feel like Anodyne 2 in some ways had electronic dance music inspired songs in it. There was that one battle, or it's the battle sequence when you go inside to clean the nano dust.
Hmm.
It's kind of this, I don't know, it's really upbeat, and it's got some maybe 808 kicks and stuff in them. It's just
Yeah. Yeah, I definitely, there's a few kind of like, yeah, dance influence tracks on Anodyne too. Like that one especially, a little bit of the final boss, and then like one of the level themes. I mean, a couple of the level themes. But I would say that to an extent, like I still have to hold back a bit with those just from like, um, because you're not like doing super fast like action stuff. So they're a little bit of a slower tempo, except for the final boss. But that song is only there for like 2 minutes.
do you mind if I ask what your favorite games were growing up?
Yeah. Oh yeah, sure. I played a lot of like Maple Story on the PC. Have you played Maple Story?
I I haven't played it, but I think I've seen it. There's this robot. It's like a square robot, right? Or is
Yeah. There's a square robot.
yeah. I
So
don't know
Maple
much about it.
Story, it's an MMORPG, but it's a side-scrolling platformer. So it's like actually like an action platformer RPG. So, we don't really see those kinds of games anymore. But you could explore a lot. But the game didn't have so much to do to overwhelm you. So most of the time you were just kind of like chilling out. It's not really like modern MMOs that kind of like give you all your dailies and stuff. Uh, and then I really like Quest 64. I still like that game. The score of that, it was written by a classical composer, so he got roped into games to like do this game OST, and I don't think he did any other game composing after that, but uh, what he made was pretty good. That game has a really nice like world design, kind of like nice 3D spaces, and yeah, just like a creative use of the orchestral palette, which I don't like. I really like classical music, but I'm a little bit picky, so I don't really like the more kind of like modern, like Hollywood movie influenced uses of it. Yeah, I don't know. And there's a lot of other ones, like a lot of Flash games on Newgrounds I played growing up. Um, those were definitely inspiring in some way. I don't really know if they're as inspiring that directly on the games we make nowadays, but they were just an example of people making stuff, on their own time for fun and not worrying too much about like commercial viability or whatever.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I kind of miss that actually. I feel like nowadays with all the AAA games, a lot of them they focus too much on realism,
Hmm.
that it kind of I don't play a game because I want to, you know, they try to formulate my thoughts. I think they try to focus on making it so much like real life that it's not even a fun game to play.
Yeah. It's like I've been playing. Like, I guess the environments just feel so big a lot of the times. Like you're just walking and walking and walking. A lot of the game is walking. I played the new Zelda for a few hours the past week, and I was just struck by like how much walking there is. I'm like, this kind of feels like real life,
Yeah,
but it's not real life. It's just walking
yeah, and
without
it's
it.
it's funny. There's even games where they emulate taking a shower and all this stuff. Like in Death Stranding, you can literally take a
Yeah.
shower, and it's yeah. I don't know why they do that. It kind of makes it seem like they're not chasing creativity. Instead,
Mm.
they might be chasing money.
Yeah, it's like mostly being impressive, right? Like the thing is, like when the studios get so big, the easiest thing to spend money on is just like technical achievements and visual achievements because you can kind of just drop those into the game and it'll kind of work. But it's kind of impossible to like really do an interesting design thing at scale. Death Stranding had these big AAA games. They usually have some interesting aspects to the game design, but for the most part, they're pretty like by the book. Like Death Stranding has some interesting stuff with all the like slow walking, but at the same time, it's also just like it's a shooter stealth game
Yeah,
with a lot of like long cutscenes.
it's funny. The reason why I was thinking of Death Stranding is because I was researching for this interview and I listened to the Nitro Rad interview you did 4 years ago,
Yeah.
and you
Before
guys
this
talked
music.
about that. Yeah,
Oh yeah, I guess that would have been right when I was playing it. I did clear the game, but I set it to easy because I was just like, I can't spend more time on this. It's too
me
long.
too.
Yeah.
I felt so bad for playing on easy, but It's one of those games, you know.
Yeah, it's just like this isn't really worth it anymore. Yeah.
That was kind of the opening questions. So now I think we're gonna jump straight into the main ones.
Okay,
So this category is mostly about influences and inspiration. So I'll get right into it.
cool.
Who inspired you when you started making games? Who inspires you now?
Getting started out. Let's see. That had been like 2011, so I think right in 2011 that would have been like a lot of the big like Flash game makers. So like Cave Story, um, Maddie Thorson's work, like her platformers. I think, and also her collaborator, like Noel Berry's games. Uh, Greg Lobanov, he did a lot of game maker games too. A lot of these like designers who did like Super Mario World ROM hacks, or I'm forgetting their name, but there's like these JRPGs on Newgrounds called like Marduk RPG. Those were inspiring. Um, Adam Saltzman's work on the Flixel engine and stuff. That's what I used to start out, and those little games were inspiring because you could like go and look at the code, especially when you start out like and you don't really know how to figure stuff out on your own. That was
And
super useful.
that was back
Yeah.
before YouTube and stuff, really, right?
No, there was YouTube. YouTube had been around for a few years, but it was before like Twitch and before like YouTube tutorials became a big thing. So there was still a lot of like using message boards. A lot of inspiration from like the game jams. Those were fun. You know, you can kind of like compete a little bit and like feel pushed to like excel. That was important. Um, so yeah, that was kind of the environment I got started in. There's another part to the question.
Who inspires you now?
Oh, now, yeah. Uh, Nowadays, I think it's roughly about the same, right? Like, well, it's a little different. Back then, I think I was like only taking inspiration from games. And nowadays, I would say the games that inspire me are still made by roughly the same kinds of people, you know? Usually one or two people making a game, either for fun in their free time or, you know, as like a career. Uh, that usually tends to be the most inspiring. Um, I do find, I actually, even though I don't really like Nintendo games that much now, I do find a lot of their work from the 90s and 2000s to be inspiring. Like, I like to read a lot of interviews from them. Um, I don't think he gets that much chance to design nowadays, but I think Miyamoto actually is quite interesting. Not really, you know, because he designed Mario or something, but he does think about, if you read these like long interviews with him, he does think about things in a way that are like very focused on the core of the game and kind of what that can get at through its like possibilities. So, you know, he goes and designs something like Pikmin, which is a really interesting, like simplified take on like RTS games, and that was pretty inspiring to see. Mm.
It's interesting how you
Yeah.
say you don't play many Nintendo games,
No, I
right?
do, but I don't like them as much.
Ah,
Yeah.
I think it's interesting though because you can still find inspiration from things you don't necessarily love.
Yeah.
So I guess that's why it's important to keep an open mind in this career.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I mean, it's definitely, well, I'll wrap around to this, but also in addition to like Nintendo, you know, there's a lot of just like I feel as I get older, there's more of being inspired by just like real life stuff happening. You know, regular people talking to them, like walking around Tokyo or just reading a lot of stuff, just doing different things. And that's actually something that, you know, like Miyamoto has talked about in a lot of interviews, and a lot of game designers I like as well. Not necessarily famous, they just get a lot of inspiration from regular things. And I think when you have a more like, yeah, like open mind, and you're able to kind of have like an enriching life in a way that isn't just, playing your favorite genre of action games. That's really what game designers and even like musicians need to like put out like truly good, games and music, I think. Because if you don't, I mean, you can still put out things that will appeal to people, but it'll kind of have this uh, kind of like inward looking feeling to it, like uh, if you think about, a really like tropey piece of media or something, it's not like it can't be enjoyable or fun, but it really does only kind of speak to one certain kind of like audience, right?
Hmm.
Like there's this RPG series I really like called like Trails. Have you played any of them?
No, I honestly haven't been playing too many games over the past year or two.
Hmm.
It's mostly because I'm focusing on music and
Cool.
this, but yeah, you can explain it.
Well, I guess the idea is that like Trails, it's a very like tropey RPG, and you kind of know you're gonna get when you play it. And so like I find it very enjoyable to play, but it's not really the most like inspirational thing, I guess. I mean, it is in some ways, but like, yeah. Um, so it's good to have a balance of what you look into, because if you don't try things that you've never tried, then you're gonna kind of just be circulating around the same ideas your whole life, which is not in your best interest if you're kind of trying to create stuff your whole life, I think.
Yeah, that brings a really good point. Another reason why, for me personally, I mean, I obviously do play games still. I've been playing Anodyne 2
Oh,
recently,
nice.
and it's one of my favorite games I've actually ever played. I think the story has really inspired me,
Well,
and
thank you.
so has the atmosphere and the world building of the game. It all just feels so I I think captivating is the word I would
Hmm.
use. But I was gonna say going out and finding new types of media has really inspired me personally with my own creative pursuits. And for me, one of those things is interviewing and reading interviews from other people and also reading books. And I was wondering, what are some examples of things you've tried that changed your mindset in your creative process?
Mm, I'm thinking about. I think just like talking to a lot of people, especially talking to people who don't play games really. Like, maybe they just play Animal Crossing or they like truly do not play games. Uh, you know, Even if they don't play games, obviously they're gonna be into something. I mean, like even some people I've talked to, they're like, "Oh, I don't have any hobbies," and then you keep asking them, and they're like, "Oh, okay, I like K-pop or something." I'm like, "Okay, there, you like everybody likes something." Um, and it's interesting to just think about like, why does somebody like K-pop? Why is somebody like, why are they into these long 6-hour hikes so much? Or what inspires them to try to be a novelist or a writer? Or why do they prefer to like raise a family and that kind of thing? Um, and just being like interested in other people and interested in other stuff. It's not like it'll necessarily become direct inspiration for anything, right? But it just kind of keeps you, I think, seeking that kind of excitement from, exploring media and stuff. And then naturally, when you go to make something, you're like, okay, how can I make something that will kind of like convey my excitement, for life or whatever in various ways.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that kind of relates to how I view art. Actually, I think art, in my opinion, at least, good art is when the artist can translate their feelings to someone.
Hmm.
And I mean, regardless of the feeling, whatever that is, if they can translate it, no matter how it's perceived, I think that they succeeded with what they were doing.
Yeah, that's a good point. It's like because there are like things that are hard to put into words, right? But if you can, the reason people are making art is like to convey these things that we can't just like say so straightforwardly. Especially like music too, right? It's like you know very complicated process that has a lot of very intuitive effects for people listening, which is interesting.
Yeah, and with music, you can even, it's so, the thing that fascinates me about music, you can translate feelings regardless of if there's any words.
Hmm.
Because, I mean, I think all of your music does have any words. Neither does mine. But there's still so many emotions that get conveyed.
Yeah.
It just shows how
Yeah.
powerful it is.
Yeah, you said you've been working on music a lot the past year, right? Like, how long,
Yeah,
what's your like history of music? Because didn't have time to look and like have your website pulled up right now, but
yeah. So I started playing piano when I was 10.
okay.
And then I played piano from then until I think around 17 was when I started really learning other instruments like guitar,
Hmm.
ukulele. And that's also around the time I got into producing. And so I've been producing for either 2 or 3 years now.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay.
Yeah. Sorry for
Wow.
talking about myself a
No,
bit,
no,
but
no, it's okay. Okay. Oh, so you're like 22, 21,
no, I'm 19.
19.
Or
Okay. Oh, wow.
sorry, the math might be a bit weird.
That's okay. Cool,
Yeah.
cool. Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's so fun to like learn new instruments. I don't know if I'll take action on this, but I've been wanting to like buy a guitar again or like get a flute or something. I like because I use flute sounds so much, but I don't know how they work. That or like maybe a clarinet. I don't know. It seems.
It's funny, you saying you use flute sounds makes me realize I'm pretty bad at understanding what instrument is playing in a song. Like I don't know why I have a hard time identifying what instruments I'm hearing because I think sometimes the music it's so synth and sample oriented. It's hard to differentiate. What's the word?
Oh yeah, when I say flute sounds,
Yeah.
I don't literally mean like an actual flute like sample. I just like flute-ish sounds. So a lot of those can just be synths, but they're kind of like they're articulated as if they were like a wind instrument or something. Um, yeah, a lot of the I can't even tell what instrument I'm using a lot of the time. Most of the time, it is like a synth or it's a flute that's been processed to not sound like a flute anymore.
Yeah. Speaking of sounds that you use, how do you decide your sound palettes? Do you kind of just go by feeling or do you have any techniques?
Uh, I spend a lot of time on before I go building out this song. Well, there's like two ways. Sometimes I might have more of like chords and melody idea, and I'll write that down really fast with like a regular synth or piano sound. But other times there's a much bigger focus. It's much more important to get the right kind of like emotion and atmosphere. So I'll spend more time on like sound design, instrument design, and this is what I've been doing in the past few years or past few games is just like I will borrow from songs that I've already made for the game and kind of use those as the starting point, um, which helps the soundtrack feel a little bit more unified, but it also just saves time, because if I already know, okay, there's a pretty good, like string sound I made for this song, I can just copy it and use it, and I'll tweak it a little bit to fit the song, but at least I won't have to start from scratch every time. Um, but yeah, like for that, it's super helpful to just listen to a lot of like strange music, I guess, or like this is why like I really love like dance and club music, because you have like every emotion in there across all these different subgenres, and like super creepy and dark, or like super ecstatic and like bright. And then you also have like ambient music, which can do the same thing without the beats. And, drawing on that as inspiration when trying to design a sound, it's a really fast way to kind of just get better at, um, figuring out how to do sound design for synth. I feel like that's the most important thing for like the game music I'm doing, is just being able to be so comfortable with, uh, adjusting synthesizers or samplers in different ways to kind of like get whatever texture I want. Yeah.
And from what I've heard in other interviews that you've done, you like to use reference tracks. How do
Yes.
you how do you use those?
So I feel like I actually, yeah, there's a few ways. I think, so there's one way which is kind of like transcribing, and that's more of like this is pretty rare, but if I like really like a song and I can't quite figure out what's going on, I might like try to transcribe it to like notes or the percussion, and that'll give me a much clearer view of like, oh, this is how this was achieved or whatever. So that's pretty rare. The second way, which is, I don't do this that much nowadays, but it would be to kind of like, that's not true. I do it still, but it's not in a huge way. It's more like if I really like one element of a song, and I've written a bit about this in blog posts, I think, then I might kind of like use that one element as a starting point. So like yesterday, I was listening to some music, and I really liked the rhythm of this one synth, but not really the other parts of the song. So I kind of like, I realized, oh, maybe I could use that in a certain context in Angeline Era's OST. So I designed a synth myself, and I used that rhythm as a starting point, and that was like a really nice like way to. That's kind of how I would use a reference track sometimes. Um, a third way might be for mixing or mastering. I'm mastering my very like simple mastering. I might.
Do you master to a certain LUF?
I'm not that rigorous about it. Basically, nowadays I will like I'll mix like usually at the end, or a little bit as I'm going along, and then like do the really tedious stuff at the end, and then I'll try to make it kind of loud, but not like radio loud,
Mm-hmm.
because it's going to play in a game. There's a few reasons. The first is that it's going to be playing in a game, so the sound effects have to come above it anyways, so it doesn't need to be that loud. The second reason is that I just don't have the technical skills to do an amazing master, so I just kind of try to get it to like a decent stage. Um, and I've gotten a little bit better at it over the years, but like ultimately I'm not that interested in mastering, so I don't worry about it too much.
I was
Um,
curious.
yeah, I think yeah. So those are probably the most common ways of using like reference tracks. Sometimes I'll borrow like a chord progression from a song if I really like it. Like some of the songs in Anodyne 2 definitely borrowed some chords from composers I really like.
Yeah, I was actually the other day I was learning some of the songs on my piano, or trying to.
Oh,
The
cool.
the only song I ended up learning was Center's Sanctuary,
Oh, okay.
and I think the chord progression for that is C major 9, and then E minor 7, and then an E minor 9.
I don't actually know the chord names I use, but probably sometimes, yeah, yeah. But I do borrow chords from old songs at times, but usually by just like copying the MIDI and adjusting them. But yeah, like music theory, I do use that if I'm really stuck. it's useful as kind of like a debugging for the song.
That was actually going to be one of my questions
Oh
later
yeah,
on.
yeah, we can talk about it more in a bit. Yeah.
Yeah. If it's okay, I'm going to take a quick breather.
Okay.
Yeah. Do I have a good pacing for you?
Yeah, seems good.
Cool. I get nervous in interviews, so
That's okay. Yeah.
I don't know if that makes you feel better at all or anything.
No, I'm fine. I get nervous if I'm the one asking questions, and I was like, if you play, do you know Hideki Kamiya, like Bayonetta and Okami? Or
Oh, yeah, Bayonet. Yeah,
he was
I haven't
giving a
played it though.
talk with the designer of Resident Evil on the weekend, and I would ask a question. I was like so nervous asking the question, even though I'm like, how many times I've been on the other side of this? And I don't know, you know. But that was kind of funny.
You got a signature from that too.
Yeah. That was fun. I don't actually know the Resident Evil guys' games that well. I haven't even played Resident Evil, but um, he's like sitting next to Kamiya, so I had to get it from him too, I guess. So that was funny.
Wow. All right, I think I'm good.
Cool.
Okay. Do you go outside often to find inspiration for music?
Uh, yeah. I like to go. Let's see. I wouldn't say I walk with the goal of like finding musical inspiration, but I do think that writing music is for me is usually like a lot of 1 hour long sessions with breaks in between them, and I find that either taking off days in between or going outside in between does help a lot. Uh, just because like it's kind of like playing a puzzle game, right? If you get stuck on trying to solve it one way for too long, you need a break to come back to it later to figure it out. That's kind of how I view kind of like going outside. So uh, I don't think it's as often that I'll be walking and be like, "Ooh, this is a cool musical idea." Usually, I have to kind of sit down and work on it first, and then once I've roughed out an idea, I can go walk outside, and that'll let me kind of like unconsciously solve a bit of the song, and then I can come back and finish it.
I think that's interesting. You recently posted about a high ropes level course on
Mm-hmm.
your blog. I was wondering, did you think about how it was similar to a game while you were doing the course, or did you kind of notice that afterwards?
I noticed I didn't really realize how game-like it would be until I got up there, and then I kind of instantly realized it was like a game, and that kind of made me more excited to keep doing it. Um, well, part of it was just like kind of fun, right? And yeah, so but up to that point, I wasn't really until I got up there. I wasn't really thinking about, oh yeah, this is like a game. But then you're doing it, and you're like, oh okay, I see. Um, which is kind of goes back to my point about trying. I mean, that's a very like uh, explicit case of trying something new, right? It's like a very segmented thing that is new. But I feel like that applies to just stuff in general, right? Like if there's a museum exhibition or somebody's having a party and you have no idea what you will encounter there. I mean, you can try to like assume and guess and talk yourself out of doing it, but you know, you're always going to be wrong unless it's like like frying an egg or something. Like I fried so many eggs that I don't really learn that much from frying them anymore, but you know.
That's me with quesadillas.
Quesadillas? Okay, cool. What do you
They're
like on your quesadilla?
chicken,
Chicken? Okay,
some
that's good.
chicken and hot sauce. That
Hot
can go a
sauce.
long way.
Nice. Yeah. That reminds me of like high school food. I had they had a lot of like hot sauce quesadillas. Or maybe at the bowling alley when I bowled a lot in high school, so
Oh,
that was like
nice.
fun. Yeah.
there's definitely a lot of game like elements in bowling. I
Oh
mean,
yeah,
it
yeah.
literally is a game.
It
So
is a game. Yeah, it's like very. It's a very level designy sport. Did you? Yeah. Have you bowled competitively at all, or?
not competitively, but
Okay.
I've gone bowling with family and
Yeah.
friends.
Yeah, it's a bit puzzly and like there's a. Do you know about like the oil?
Do they put that on the floor?
Yeah. So like on the lane, you can't see this, but there's actually like a an oil pattern. They have a machine that like lays down oil at certain like thicknesses, and that actually affects how much the ball can like spin. So for people who are competitive bowlers, their bowling balls are not weighted equally. They have like they're kind of like the center of gravity is off in some way. So that causes the ball to kind of like hook and depending on the oil density and where it's densest, like that affects where you need to like throw the ball. And anyways, it has a very like level designy aspect to it in a way that's very complicated and invisible. But
That's something you could probably write a whole article on if you wanted to.
yeah, I've been meaning to do that someday. Like it's a write about bowling is one of those bucket list things.
Do you think artists should stay present when they're outside? So, what I mean by that, I guess, is not wearing headphones or, being on their phones.
Yeah, I've read a little bit about this, and by a little bit I mean like one article. I didn't really check the sources, but I kind of understand something. There was something that said there's been research done about like memory and recording, like, and if people they were like comparing test subjects who like recorded a concert or took photos versus they didn't, and the ones who don't record, they like remember more in some capacity. And that was an interesting thing to read because it's always kind of been like my intuition that that was the case. Like, so I try not to like get stressed out about capturing something live, right? If it's important enough, you will remember it. Um, I think in terms of listening to music outside, I've I think I'm still the type that prefers not to listen to any music when going outside. Um, there was a few months this year where I was doing a lot of that, and it was like fun, but it does kind of disconnect you from your surroundings a bit. And I found that I was also just trying to like find the right song to listen to all the time, and it was just a waste of time. Uh, so I don't really do that anymore, and I haven't really um, for most of my life except like high school. Uh, but yeah, I would
I'm
say
definitely guilty of that.
yeah. I mean, it's like it's fun, right? It definitely is fun to like put on some music you like and just like walk along with it because it's more energizing. But you do definitely miss a lot of things when you're, not tuned in.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's another thing I've been doing as of recently. I think actually in doing so, if you're more present, no matter if you're outside or even inside, I feel like just sitting with your thoughts, closing your eyes for even 10 minutes, you can generate so many new ideas that you wouldn't
Hmm.
have otherwise.
Yeah. 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 It's like taking a moment to like do nothing is so important for a lot of maybe everything, not necessarily just only creative stuff, but like being able to like have an inner dialogue is very useful, especially for like for game design and writing. I think. Yeah.
All right, so that was the influence and inspiration segment. Now we're gonna go into the storytelling.
Okay.
I was wondering, how do you decide what stories to tell in your games?
So it depends on who's leading the game. So I guess for the ones that I've focused most on,
No rush, by the way.
oh yeah, I'm kind of thinking through this stuff. Well, Stephanie is the most recent point. Um, I think it's like there's certain patterns you might just observe in people over your life. Like so, there's a lot of patterns about Taiwanese Americans or people in Taiwan that I've thought about a lot, and it's really interesting to me, and I just want to kind of communicate why that's interesting while framing it in a way that it's not only relevant to people who like know Taiwanese people. So with Stephanie, it was like, how do people relate to their countries or like their homes that they don't live in anymore? And how can we frame that in this really interesting psychological way? So in trying to answer that question, that's kind of like how the story comes about. Um, or like in Angeline Era right now, there's a lot of like different cultures that are kind of like coexisting in this game's world. And to write those, we're thinking a bit about, real life cultures that are like coexisting, like uh, different groups of people immigrating to other countries and kind of like the various dynamics that they will have with the country they're moving into. Um, it's kind of like one point of inspiration for it. Uh, and then a game idea that I'm kind of thinking about right now, I've been thinking a lot about the dynamics of like creative communities over time. What happens when kind of like fame enters the mix versus what happens when people are all just making stuff for fun and not worrying about making a living off of it. Uh, the kind of ways in which different communities can be insular. So like there's all these like different ideas that will pop up. And sometimes they feel like, oh, it's better to address it through an essay or writing. And sometimes it's like, well, this would work better through a story, articulated through characters and stuff.
Do you ever look back in history books or anything to find inspiration?
Yeah, I mean, I have a lot of like, I guess like academic interests. So I'm always reading a few uh, like papers or like nonfiction books. Because and as you like read a lot more and more of these, you start to realize that like these academic books are basically somebody's personal project for like 3 to like 6 or more years. Somebody was really really into this topic for a long time, and they just wanted to kind of like tell other people about it, but in a way that's academically rigorous and can be used to do further research. And like you read these things and you learn so many things that you wouldn't find in like 1,000 lifetimes unless you looked into that book. And these books have like references and citations, and those link to like so many other books and topics and ideas. So, and as you read these, there's a lot of different reasons why history is interesting. I guess the most interesting is just to like see the ways in which people were kind of like figuring out how they wanted to live in the past. So, I was reading a lot about like um, various types of like older Japanese religions and the priests that would like run these religions, and like how they would incorporate Buddhism or like local Japanese religion together, and how they would make that meaningful for themselves, or like how they would have to like make up a myth for their shrine to try to like attract the most kind of like followers around them. um, and I was like, oh wow, things haven't really changed that much. I mean, they have, but like there's a lot of the same anxieties, and sometimes it's really useful to just kind of see how other people were choosing to work through stuff in the past. Yeah.
Do you ever see a lot of the same problems that you read about back then in modern times in your community?
Um, I think there's there's definitely some problems that still feel like they happen nowadays. They're just like seem to be inherent to like humans, like deciding how to motivate yourself
Hmm.
in life. I feel like because like you'll get people that are like, oh, I want to start a war because I need more resources so I can get to Mars because that's the only way my life will have meaning. And I feel like there's definitely parallels in the past. But at the same time, there's a lot of problems that are like unique to our day. Like nowadays we have
The
huge problems related to
interwebs.
like like just attention spans and the way that companies are just kind of profiting off of people wanting to by like taking advantage of them wanting to see new things.
It's pretty
Global
funny.
warming. Yeah.
The the progress we've made in the past 2 decades, I feel like it's been such a big change compared to the progress we were making before. So I think because of that, maybe a lot of people haven't had time to really prepare for the problems that have arisen since those changes, like the
Yeah.
government and lead- leaders in the world.
Yeah, like as soon as there's a new like technology that comes out, like there's somebody exploiting it for bad ends, and then larger groups of people move so slow to react to it. Uh, I hope that that will slow down a bit. Like, although as I say that, now we have the AI
Yeah.
thing polluting search engines or whatever, and that's a new challenge.
Has that affected how you make games? The popularity of AI?
Not really. I mean, there's not that many practical uses to AI for someone of our scale. Like maybe texture generation or something, but it's like, we're not like sometimes ChatGPT can be useful for like brainstorming ideas in response to a vague question, but like I don't know, I haven't really had a legitimate use case for it yet. Like some people say it's useful for programming, but it's just like I've asked some things and it doesn't really help. It like gives the wrong answer or something, and yeah, I think there could be some uses for it, but
It's kind
right
of
now it seems
a
like
use
people
case
are
scenario.
what?
It's kind of a use case scenario too.
Yeah, it's like one of those things that like people are using for bad things,
Yeah.
but it could be used for good, but that's not really what it's being used for.
Yeah. It more depends on who's using it than the tool itself.
Yeah, yeah.
All right. So that was it for the storytelling section. Now, the last section of this podcast is about making music.
Oh, cool.
And yeah, my first question is, your music is described as ambient melodic. Can you
Mm-hmm.
describe that for people who aren't familiar with the genre?
Yeah, so it's a bit of a. I think what it means to me is that there's a really huge focus on texture and sound palette, almost to the point that the it's just as important as like the structural concerns of the song. Like, and what I mean by that is some game soundtracks might just all be orchestral sounds, right? And I would say that's not, even though you can use those sounds in an ambient way, I would say that somebody composing with those instruments is not thinking as much about like, um, they're not as concerned as the possibilities of sound as kind of the effects, the psychological effects of using, violins and horns. Whereas for a lot of what I have to do in games, like some, it's good to write a good like hook or whatever, or like a catchy chorus, or cool overall like arrangement of the song. But you can't really just like do that for a game. You have to be thinking about like the emotions of the area and uh, like the atmosphere and like the kind of the gameplay context for it. And getting at those things through music is, for me, a big part of it is just thinking about like the ambient side of things, more about like, these four parts of the song aren't going to be layered like perfectly together, but they do work like texturally. They can contribute to like a very uh, kind of like thick atmosphere or whatever. Like the song in Anodyne 2, the Blue Veil song, right? Like that has some melodic elements to it, but it wasn't like I was scientifically deciding how it fits together. I'm just banging a bunch of different textures that kind of work, and then trying to get them in a way that has like a satisfying flow to it.
That that might that actually makes me feel a lot better because that's kind of how I go about things.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes when I hear music like yours and I listen to it and I'm like, how did he do that? What? It makes me feel better that you're not. I mean, you're still really smart about it in a lot of ways, but it's not this meticulously crafted.
Yeah, and I like to like say, I guess ambient melodic could also mean it's not, like it's. I mean, it's there's some ways in which it's meticulous, but it's not like, I feel like it's not as meticulous as maybe what pop writers do. They spend like weeks on a song or something, engineering every single aspect of it. But I feel like the ambient side of ambient melodic is like, you're more okay with the fact that it's not going to be all perfectly in your control. You're just kind of just trying to like tame this thing so that it comes out in a way that works pretty well. Um, because a lot of the fun of like ambient music is just experimenting, and trying different things out. Uh, I mean, you can be really meticulous with making ambient music if you want to, but in my usage of it, it's more of like, trying to focus more on like the intuitive aspects of it. You're not trying to engineer the most like TikTokable like pop hook, right? We're here to write music, and the uses of that music is, it's a very much like a craft in some ways. Well, partially craft and art, but you know, there's like, uh, yeah, I don't know. Yeah.
How would you say mixing for video games compares to other types of music?
Yeah, like I've written a few songs that were not for games. I think with games, you can be like, well, there's still the thing in common in that, mixing is still important because you want to like make sure every part is heard in the way you expect it to be heard. Um, and so mixing is just kind of like balancing that. But you don't have to mix in such a rigorous way that it will like sound perfectly on like a dance floor system or like a car radio. Uh, and that's probably the biggest difference. I also think that, yeah, yeah, probably the biggest difference is that you can focus on different things than just like making a vocal sit really well in the mix. I mean, you can focus a lot more on just how do I layer a ton of different sounds into this one moment or whatever, rather than like, I have to make it sound really great on a sound system. Um, yeah, that's probably the biggest thing. And that's also kind of why I like doing game music, because, I don't have to fuss about that stuff as much. Um, I know that if you're consistent with how you make the music for the game, people will just like it. And like as they're listening to it, no one's gonna, if it's a little bit soft, they'll just turn it up, right? Make it a little bit louder in the game. Mm. And that's kind of freeing because you can experiment a lot with soundtracks.
I don't know if this is just my mind playing tricks on me, but I feel like when I play a game and I listen to the soundtrack in the game, it sounds better than when I hear it on streaming. I don't know why.
I think that is true. I think it's because you're kind of getting it with all the emotions that the visuals and gameplay provide. So it's like listening to a dance song in a club versus listening to it like at a McDonald's. It's gonna sound better because it's working better emotionally, I think.
That makes sense. What kind of sound effects are important for making atmosphere in games?
Mm,
And also, if you don't mind, I actually read that you like to use white noise kind of for,
hmm
wave sounds and of the like.
Yeah. Uh, well, I feel like any sound is can be useful in a song. Like uh, but certain sound effects do have certain atmospheric connotations to it. Like metallic sounds have different connotations than like bird sounds. And if you understand that, then if you're writing a song and you need it to have a certain atmosphere, then it might help to think from it from like a metallic sounds perspective. Whereas if you want a different atmosphere, it might help to start with like, bird sound, not literally bird sound effects. Like, I mean, maybe you could, but you could also start from the standpoint of like trying to design a sound that's inspired by birds and then use that for like atmosphere. Um, I think a useful thing is just kind of knowing how the different kinds of percussion can add energy to a song in a way that's not necessarily noticeable is really useful because sometimes a song might be lacking a certain level of like groove or energy to it. And it's not that you need to add more notes or like better chords, but it might just be that you're missing frequencies at a certain range, which can be like percussion can help you to achieve like the energy you need. Yeah. So it's a matter of just paying careful attention to songs you like, but also sound. I guess this is how real life can be an inspiration for music. Is just like how sound effects in real life kind of affect your emotional state. That can be a really useful reference.
Yeah. For me personally, when I'm out and about, since I don't know why, but when I'm out and about or on a hike or just taking a walk and I hear nature sounds, I feel really inspired by it for some reason. Because I think growing up, I've listened to a lot of ambient music, and a lot of
hmm
ambient music can often have those sounds. And it's just pretty to hear in real life, obviously.
Yeah, there's something about like real life is just full of a lot of like calming compositions of sounds, and it's always a little bit different.
And there's a rhythm to everything.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
that can be really nice.
What are some ways you like to write melodies?
Melodies. I think melodies are such like an intuitive thing to me. It's hard to say much outside of kind of like the textbook stuff, like which is like they feel like they're often there to kind of emphasize the emotional point the rest of the song is making. So sometimes they're very hard to write. It's very hard to write a melody until I have the percussion or chords laid down, or if I have the atmosphere laid down. Because if I don't have the atmosphere laid down, then it's hard to make good decisions about the melody because uh, like you don't know what you're trying to accomplish with the melody yet. Um, and that's why it's helpful to start from a sound design or like a chord design standpoint because those things can so heavily influence the bass like emotion layer of the song. Um, but sometimes, and this is definitely a little bit easier if it's like a straightforwardly energetic song. Like you might be able to just start with the melody, right? And um, I don't know if I really have a tip to doing it. It's just like you kind of just have to write thousands and thousands of melodies and you know build an intuition for what you like and what you don't like and what does work and what doesn't work.
I think scales help a lot too.
Oh yeah. I mean, like theoretically, yeah, you should stick to like sticking to a scale. Thinking about the scale you're using will help. Um,
But also break the rules if you want.
yeah, but also like the instrument choice you're using could affect whether a melody seems good or not. So there's like just a million variables, right? But like a melody that's being voiced in like a distorted guitar might sound really bad, but it might be really good through like a like a chime or whatever, like xylophone.
Or clarinet.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah.
Where do you like to find music samples?
um, I kind of just use the ones that come up Ableton. Like, I do. I have downloaded the general music or the GM MIDI, general MIDI library. Um, there's some like Creative Commons licensed sound effects on like Freesound, like free sound effect packs that I bought for games or whatever. Uh, yeah, I'm not a huge like collecting samples guy, but um, it is nice to have them like at arm's reach. A lot of like game sound fonts.
Do you use a lot of VSTs or not really?
Not well, I use a lot of stuff in like Ableton, like delay, well, its whole like range of whatever there is, which are like their own built-in VSTs. I don't use a lot of external VSTs just because it's tedious to me. I don't know. It just doesn't fit into the UI of Ableton as well for me. And there are a few like sampler VSTs I'll use for like sound fonts. Um, but for the most part, I try to just stick to whatever Ableton has. And that seems to have been good enough. Like it would be nice to like try out other synths at some point, but it kind of like feels like I've never really hit the end of what Ableton stuff can already do. Um, but I don't know. One day maybe there's some like synths that like friends will post that look kind of cool. But
Yeah,
yeah.
I think it goes to show how powerful these DAWs really are
Mm-hmm.
because you don't even necessarily need to look externally for any hardware or synths if you wanted to make music like that.
Yeah. It's all like it's all kind of already there. Um, and it really is up to the person. If having different synths like helps you get into different like headspaces, then I would say it's worth using. Um, but yeah, I don't know.
As artists, we often tinker with the creative process. What do you do to mess with the tools that you use for that?
Um,
Wait, sorry, can I rephrase it?
yeah.
So, as artists, we often tinker with the creative process. Do you have any tools you use to change what your process is?
I think for songs, yeah, like it helps to come at it in different ways, right? Like sometimes it helps to start with like a different like a prompt, like try to write out the song in words at first or whatever, or try to like start by trying to capture a certain angle of the scene it's playing in the game. Sometimes it helps to just start with like a beat. Um, And it's just fun to start a song in different ways. So that can be a lot more useful than just having to be like, oh yeah, I got to start with like laying down chords and piano. That's not always that fun. Um,
Yeah,
yeah.
sometimes it's fun to start with drums even. You just start with a drum beat
Mm-hmm.
and then maybe you go into the bass, or if you feel like it, the chords. There's an
Yeah.
infinite amount of ways to do that.
Yeah. Like there's a friend who used to do these like experimental writing groups in Chicago, and like she would always have some like different like prompt about writing. Like one of them would be like count to 100 out loud while writing, which is really hard. And it's like a type of like free writing. You get a lot of weird ideas that way. And there's all kinds of like fun exercises like that. Like, yeah, like I used to teach game music in Chicago for a few years, and like there would be a lot of different exercises like would come up with, like making people think about colors or like environments or something.
Yeah. Do you think that writing down ideas helps?
Uh, a little. I think writing down ideas. It depends. I would say it doesn't always necessarily mean it's going to be a useful idea in the future, but it's useful insofar as that it lets you think about something else. Like a lot of times I'll have like two or three ideas and I'll write them down and I might not really use them, but that's okay because now my head is a little bit more clear to like think about things
Hmm.
because I have the tendency to kind of worry about like losing an idea even though I know it doesn't really matter. Um, yeah, I mean writing stuff down can be useful, but I find that even if I wasn't writing stuff down, like you do figure a lot of stuff out when you sit down and really just focus. So like it's definitely not like life or death to write down every idea.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think for me personally, it's helped a lot because sometimes I get stuck in ruts and
Mm-hmm.
I can't necessarily think of that many ideas, and it helps to be able to come back to this source. Actually, I've been writing down 10 ideas every day for the past couple of, I think a month or two,
Mm-hmm.
and it's been really useful to me.
It's good. Yeah, I mean, it's important to like find like a process that works really well for you and like stick to it. Yeah.
Yeah, it's probably different for everyone.
Mm-hmm.
All right, so that's the end of the making music section. Now, if you want, we can talk about Angeline Era a bit.
Yeah, I have a few minutes.
Cool. So, like we talked about before, you're currently working on a game called Angeline Era. I think it looks really good.
Thank you.
I was wondering, what can players expect from playing this game?
Angeline Era. Well, it's very there's a very strong sense of like place and world in the game, I think, because it's very hands off in the progression. We kind of let you just poke around. There's like a world map that lets you enter different levels, and you're free to kind of like poke around that in any order, kind of go off on whatever tangent you want. Um, but at the same time, there's a lot more focus than like an open world game. We don't really have any filler. Uh, it's still probably like a 10-hour game. It's just that because you're free to kind of like go about as you please, I think that lets you just get a lot more into the headspace of being in the game rather than being like worried about like, oh, I got to collect 100 different colors of like plants to craft. Um, so there's a strong atmosphere to that. The action is a lot of fun, uh, and drawing you through it. Of course, there's a pretty interesting story about this character from the USA, and he's kind of like goes to this country of Era, and he's like increasingly drawn in between two competing like worldviews, like one represented by these like ancient fae and the others by these like futuristic angels. And so it's not that he's picking a side, but it's kind of like, you get to learn. You don't learn about these philosophies explicitly, but there's just so many characters that kind of like engage with the different sides in different ways.
Wow,
So so you're kind of just gonna like hear different interesting ideas and characters as you're going along.
it sounds
Um,
really unique.
yeah, it's pretty rare for an action game to kind of like be framed in this way, I guess. Like having story presented in such a way, but also having this kind of like level of openness without being so open in the way that a lot of games are nowadays. Yeah, so hopefully it should be refreshing. There's a really strong sense of level design. The art and music will be great. So yeah,
Like usual.
yes, like usual.
If you don't mind me asking, what does light ecological field research mean? Does that relate to this game? Because I read in an interview that you mentioned that about an unannounced game, but that could have been a while ago.
Ecological field research.
Yeah.
Was this about Stephanie?
Oh, maybe.
What was it about? Like we were doing it, or the game was about it?
It was about you.
Oh, maybe it was for Angeline Era because we went to Ireland for like a week and a half last year, and we were like hiking a lot and like looking around and stuff. Um, that was mostly for like, well, there was a lot of historical stuff we were learning. I'm actually a quarter Irish, which is like rare and weird and surprising, right? But so I've wanted to go to Ireland for a while. Um, Marina was interested in the history of Christianity there and stuff, and then we were both kind of interested in like the archaeological history and like the natural history too. So we were like getting to go see a lot of like mountains, hills, and like rocky stuff, cliffs, forests, and that was really great to see a lot of that firsthand. Um, because like I said, it's not like we'll necessarily draw on all of that for the game, but when you do need to think of something, it's really useful to have all that experience to kind of just like draw on.
Yeah. Thanks for explaining that.
Yeah.
All right, the last few questions. What platforms will it be on?
Oh, well, Windows, Mac, and Linux, hopefully, hopefully Linux. And then at some point afterwards, the consoles. So, probably Switch, PS5, Xbox Series, the new Switch. Maybe not PS4 or Xbox One, but we'll see.
Is there a release date for it yet?
No, I think we'll be wrapping it up like late next year, but whether that releases very early 2025 or end of 2024 is like TBD. We'll just have to see how
And
things go.
what are the different stages of developing a game like that?
Well, for this, there's a pretty long like tools phase. Like we're developing these tools to build the environments. These like 3D kind of cube-based levels. There's a lot of like deciding what kind of game we even wanted to make. So we're prototyping like puzzle systems and different kinds of like action mechanics, and that took a couple of months to come along. And then you got to develop the level design philosophy you want. There's like developing the art style, which takes forever. Designing like the philosophy of how do you want the levels to fit together in a world, and finalizing the story and how that fits into everything. And then making all of the levels and the songs and stuff. So it happens in part by part, very slowly. But yeah.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for joining me.
Mm-hmm.
I really appreciated your time. I had one last question though.
Yeah, sure.
Is there a demo that I could play for Angeline Era?
There is publicly not, but I mean, I'm happy to send you the private demo we have if you just want to check it out.
Oh.
Yeah, but don't share. I mean, you can. I don't care if you share, but I will, like it's technically private. It's kind of old, but you can get a sense for it.
Yeah, I'd love to.
Yeah, I'll send that along.
Great. Thank you so much.
Cool.
And
Well,
yeah, I feel really honored to have people like you on
well, thank you.
because I'm still pretty small and
Hmm.
I'm still learning a lot about this stuff. I'm not an expert, and it just makes me really happy that people want to come on and talk.
Thank you. Yeah. Well, like, yeah. I mean, the only thing differing like experts from like people starting out is just doing the thing for a long time. So like you're seem to be working hard towards working on music and stuff. So yeah.
Thank you. I am. Awesome. Well, that's the end of the episode, everyone. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see
Thank
you
you for
next time.
listening. Take care.
Bye. Hey guys. I just wanted to say, first of all, thank you for listening to the episode. I'm getting better each and every episode, I think. And yeah, it's just been really fun to keep doing this. I also wanted to do a quick announcement and say I'm going to be uploading every Friday. So yeah, stay tuned for that. And I'll see you next week. Bye.